Convener of the Scottish Greens, together with Patrick Harvey, MSP. She is currently Rector of the University of Aberdeen and has also previously been a councillor at Edinburgh Council. Okay, next to Maggie, we have Craig Miller from the Scottish Labour Party. No, I'm sorry, right, I'm sorry, I that's too quickly, sorry. Next to Maggie is John Edward from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. He is number 5 on their list. John is currently the director of the Scottish Council for Independent Schools, but has a previous life as a head of the UK office of the European Union Parliament. So he's now trying to get in the body that he has previously served as an official. Okay, then next to him, Craig, is Craig Miller. Craig Miller is number 3 on the Scottish Labour Party list. He works in the Scottish Parliament for Richard Leonard, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and otherwise is described, according to Google, at least as a political activist. You may want to explain what a political activist at some point, but anyway. Then, last but by no means least, we have Kyle McGettigan. Kyle is not actually standing on one of the lists, but he is a member of UKIP, and he's representing UKIP on this occasion. He's a volunteer food bank worker and a youth worker. I should say that unfortunately, despite our best efforts, we've not been able to get somebody from the Brexit Party. That does therefore mean that if occasionally I intervene and kind of try to ask an awkward question, if you kind of notice that maybe my interventions come from a somewhat Brexiteer direction, that it should not be in any way an attempt to infer my views, which of course none of you know anyway, but rather that I am trying to help to maintain the balance of the occasion by ensuring that perhaps what a Brexiteer might say during the course of the debate is at least interjected, and the other candidates are expected to respond. In any case, we've got a couple of people, well, at least 2, possibly 3 representing lists that are in favour of Brexit, but doubtless more of that will become clear as we go on. So, without any further ado, what we've done, we drew lots for the order in which people should speak for the opening statements, and number 1 is John Edward from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. So John, you have 3 minutes to say why people should be voting for the Liberal Democrat list, and more broadly, if you wish to, reflect the ALDE lists across the other 27 members of the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm John Edward. I, in various times, have worked in Scotland House in Europe and then in the European Parliament in Scotland, and was also the spokesman for the Remain campaign in 2016, which, at least in Scotland, achieved the result that I'd rather hoped we'd achieved across the rest of the United Kingdom, and otherwise we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. So that's why I'm here. I've been involved in European matters one way or the other for 25 years. This is my first time and possibly my last week as a political candidate. But I just think it's too important for us not to all put our shoulders to the wheel in this event, because it's been a total failure. It doesn't really matter what everybody thinks on this table or in the audience of where they stand on Brexit now. We've had over 3 years to deliver something which we were told could be done in half an hour, and we haven't moved one step forward. This is, to a greater or lesser extent, a national humiliation in terms of how we're perceived, both within the European continent but further afield. We haven't delivered any of the promised outcomes that people are talking about. There isn't a shred of positivity in the public debate in Britain right now, and it's all down to the failure to be able to deliver something that was effectively undeliverable. So it's not actually a problem with one party or another not having done the work. It's the concept. We now know that the concept itself was undeliverable. In 2014, in the Scottish referendum, you had a large white paper from the SNP that you could vote for or against as your alternative future, and at least you could test the arguments. In 2016, there wasn't a single scrap of paper on the Leave side as to what the future would look like, and we're still in that situation now. So there's all sorts of reasons I think we should just make it stop. Make it stop. If you want to have another vote further down the line when we worked out exactly what kind of Brexit people want, that's great. But for the time being, don't do this just because we feel we have to, even though we don't know what it means. We will be putting up economic barriers to all of us So never mind the idea that only 10% of businesses trade directly with Europe. You all know that your lecturers, that your doctors, your dentists, your teachers, whoever it might be, are all part of a massive supply chain across Europe that will all be affected by these barriers. You know that public service jobs are hugely affected. General Teaching Council tells us teacher applications are down 90% in 1 year from Europe. And you know that in terms of security, whether it's climate security, whether it's personal security, whether it's police, or whether it's issues with Northern Ireland, it would be better to stay. So I don't think this is a dry run for somebody else's campaign. I don't think this is a bailout for one party or another. I simply think this is a national disaster, and the best and simplest thing to do is to stop where we are. And from there we can come back, build again an argument. I'll have the argument when the time comes, but for the time being, our simple message is stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And exemplary for keeping to time. Thank you, John. Right, number 2 is Peter Griffiths, who now tell me he is number 2 indeed on his list. So Peter Griffiths for ChangeUK.
Any student will tell you that the programme The Prisoner is I'm not a number, I'm a free man. So I know it's a favourite of students everywhere, but certainly when I was at university it was certainly a favourite of mine. My name's Peter Griffiths, I'm for ChangeUK, and my introduction actually hid a huge amount of my European background. In 1998 I joined the aviation industry with aspirations to build something which has become a core product here in Europe. I joined the low-cost airline industry, and I was a pilot flying for one of the low-cost airlines. By the time I had finished my career, I was Director General Civil Aviation for the United Kingdom, signing the documentation that pulled the UK air traffic control system and all of its single European sky mechanisms into the European system so that you could travel with yourselves, your business, and your freight, freedom of goods, freedom of movement and freedom of services to anywhere in Europe. I was proud to be part of that startup, and I'm proud to be part of this startup too, because this startup is probably one of the most important startups for you, because this party is looking to the future, not looking behind, but looking to the future. So I finished my time with the European Commission. I was the chairman of the performance review body for air traffic control in Europe, overseeing 31 countries and the management of air traffic control along a transnational structure. And that's what the European Union is about, is managing those very big issues that we cannot do on our own. That if you want to deal with something, for example, a climate change issue, that when I went to go and represent Europe in Montreal at the United Nations level, I knew I had 500 million people behind me, because what I was advocating was something that I could compete with people elsewhere in US, Russia, China, India, Brazil, all of these big countries. I had a very big voice behind me. So ChangeUK is about that. It's about trying to change the politics which we believe is fundamentally broken. We believe that the people's vote is only the way to change it, and that we should remain in Europe, because Europe is our prosperity, Europe is our educational standard, Europe is the place where we belong. So that's why we're fighting for ChangeUK in Scotland.
Okay,
Thank you.
lovely. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Right, number 3 is Maggie Chapman for the Green List.
Thank you very much, John. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming along this evening. It's great to be here, given that we weren't expecting these elections just a few weeks ago. These are probably the most important European elections we face, though, not only for our politics, but also for our planet. And the Scottish Greens are standing on 3 key priorities in these elections. Firstly, we want to say that Scotland's voice must be heard. We know Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain a member of the EU nearly 3 years ago. That voice has been largely ignored, and we want to say we need to stop Brexit. But we need to stop Brexit for several reasons. We don't think that the EU is perfect as it is, so we want to remain and rebel. that rebellion is really, really important. There's a lot that needs to change within the European Union to make it more democratic, to make it more open and more engaging for the citizens across the continent. But we also know that remaining is important for our public services. We know that the UK government is planning trade deals with North America that would see the wholesale sell-off of some of our public services, the NHS and our education, for example. And we want to say no to that, yes to protecting our public services, investing in them within the EU. Secondly, we want to tackle climate breakdown. This is probably the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced, and it is only the Greens who have a concerted plan in Scotland and across the continent to tackle this. And that plan is a Green New Deal. With our Green New Deal, we will create not only over 200,000 jobs in Scotland, but those jobs will be high quality, high skill and high pay, but we can also create warm homes and clean air with proper investment in renewables. But one of the key aspects of the Green New Deal is that it allows us to restructure our economy. The economy that has got us into this mess, our political mess, our economic mess and our climate mess at the moment. It's no longer good enough just to tinker around the edges of an already broken system. Our third priority is to give people hope. I've said before that the job of the radical is to make hope possible. And that is exactly what Scottish Greens offer you in these elections. We want to put forward a positive case for a Europe transformed, not only being able to tackle climate breakdown, and also to stand up for freedom of movement, to stand up for people like me, who are Scots by choice, and say that immigrants are welcome here. But we need to extend that beyond European boundaries and end Fortress Europe, and also use the power of Europe for good. Let's have an end to nuclear weapons across the continent to make a real transformation in our society. So for these three key reasons, for a strong voice that will put your interests at the heart of whatever I do, and for somebody who can really tackle the climate breakdown, please vote Green on Thursday. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. We now go to number 4, which is Craig Miller for the Labour Party.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me along. These are elections none of us expected to be having. However, it's the incompetence and inability of Theresa May and her Tory government to negotiate a good deal that has led us here. Now, the Labour Party has put forward alternatives: access to a single market, a customs union, protection of workers' rights, which would ensure no need for a hard border in Ireland. But you know, this election is about so much more than just Brexit. It's about more than just those who voted leave and those who voted remain. It's about who we are as a country and what we stand for as a country. That's why I ask that we reject in the strongest terms possible the ideology of hate and division being peddled by both the Brexit and UKIP parties. Now, we should not treat this as a second referendum. The Brexit Party, as we see across the UK, is unfortunately ahead. They will use that to suggest that we should not have a second referendum at all. That would be wrong. I voted Remain in the election. I campaigned hard to be part of the European Union. I am a proud European, but I was also on the losing side. Twice now in the UK Parliament, the Labour Party have voted for a confirmatory referendum, and twice it has been rejected because there has not been the majority. At some point there may be a majority for something, as we have seen again, the negotiations between the Labour Party and the Conservatives have broken down. They have broken down because the Conservatives have been unable to deliver Brexit over 3 years and expected the Labour Party to dig them out of a hole in 6 weeks. But I do hope that you will go out and vote for a party that is on the side of the many, a party that does have a vision for the whole of the United Kingdom, and I hope that you will vote Scottish Labour on Thursday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, number 5 is Glioma Culkin for the SSP. I forgot to mention in my kind of little very short personal bio for Liam, so let me correct that. So Liam is an IT worker in the NHS, and you can make of that whatever you will. So, Liam, about the left in the EP and why people should be interested in that.
Thanks very much to the organisers for asking us to come along, and particularly from the perspective of our party, and that we're slightly surprised to be asked, given that we're not actually standing in this election ourselves. But what I hope to try and do is to articulate a kind of unique or different perspective on tonight through the lens of looking at Europe as a whole from a left perspective. The last European elections was my first ever opportunity to vote. I must admit, after the referendum I didn't expect to get that chance again. But I will be listening intently, as you will be, to the rest of the candidates, because I'm in a kind of unique situation in that tonight.
You're going to tell us who you're going to vote for?
My vote is also up for grabs. So I'll be listening intently to the other candidates as yourself and see if anybody can convince me as to where my vote goes as well. I think what we could all probably agree in the room, or I would certainly hope that we could all agree probably on the platform, is that this situation is an absolute mess. And like most things, it's a mess. To me, it appears that there's no easy way out of this. There was never going to be a Brexit deal in my mind that could satisfy everyone, but Theresa May and the Tories have somehow managed to create a situation that pleases nobody, and we're now faced with this situation and fighting these European parliamentary elections. What Brexit seems to be doing, and I think unfortunately is going to continue to do, is going to create a fog over the rest of politics for the next few years, and we're entering a real period of political flux and instability, the likes of which we'll probably never see again, and with that does also present opportunities. So looking at it from a wider point of view of the left bloc in the European Parliament, what these elections give us a chance to do is, our position in the 2016 referendum was that we backed Remain. We did so with no illusions in what the EU is as an institution and how we would like to reform, so our position was almost Remain and Reform, to put it in kind of simple terms, although after hearing Maggie, I actually quite like the Remain and Rebel line, so we'll probably steal that one for future. Looking at it from the perspective of the left, I think this election gives us the opportunity to send a message to the EU that the present situation with the rise of the far right across Europe, the politics of hatred, the politics of xenophobia and anti-migrant rhetoric needs to change, and that we can create a Europe fundamentally which works for the majority of the 500 million citizens there, and try and create a Europe which is outward looking, which is open, and that redistributes wealth for the benefit of the 500 million citizens of Europe. So hopefully you'll enjoy the discussion tonight. There has been a lot of heat and not a lot of light in this debate. I think it's probably fair to say over the last 2 years, so hopefully as a panel together we can change that tonight, and thanks for coming.
Number 6 is Carl McGettigan, who is representing UKIP.
Thanks for having me, especially with such short notice. So, UKIP in 2014 campaigned on a platform to unequivocally leave the European Union. They returned more MEPs than any other party, and at this point I was pretty apolitical. I was still in secondary school, and I was more involved with the Scottish independence debate, which I was more briefly interested in, but it never really got me interested in politics. And then the Brexit debate came around, and even during that, I stayed apolitical. I really didn't know what side I wanted to win. When the result came in, I remember just thinking, I didn't expect it to happen. I don't think most of us in the room thought it was going to happen, especially the polls that were coming the weeks before, but it happened, and a lot of my family who were pro-Remain, a lot of my family were Leave, so it was a bit of a polarised household for a week or two. But in the end, we all accepted the result. People across the UK were fed up. They were fed up with a Europe which is in decline, which has seen massive amounts of economic problems. The Eurozone's created, especially for people like me, young people, it's created a massive amount of youth unemployment. And you've seen this, there's skyrocketing youth unemployment across Europe right now. It's almost reaching 40% in Greece, because they had to take a bailout, but the people of Greece refused at a referendum. And what people have seen across Europe is the rejection of the European Union in several referendums. I've got family in Ireland, and we witnessed them vote pretty clearly against an EU treaty. The EU then essentially held them hostage until they voted again. The second time they voted in the way the European Union wanted them to do. And as you can tell, there wasn't a third referendum. And what we're seeing right now is the complete and utter rejection of Brexit by politicians. Politicians don't want Brexit to happen. They didn't. There is a small amount of Brexiteers in the House of Parliament. And I think that shows how unrepresentative politicians are of people nowadays. The people in the UK voted to leave, but the politicians voted to remain, and they've not been able to get out of that mindset from the moment the vote came in. And we've spent the last almost 3 years now, trying to negotiate a deal with someone who doesn't want us to leave, and we've had a government that, in many respects, is not wanted us to leave. A government that's actually contradicts itself more than it contradicts anyone else. They've betrayed their own manifesto. Theresa May's had speech after speech where she contradicts things that she once said. I think if anyone's watched Prime Minister's questions, you'll have seen the Prime Minister reject the idea of having European elections over and over again. This election's about trust, and it's about whether or not we can trust politicians to implement the decisions we vote for.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as chance would have it, the two people to draw the lowest numbers were those actually representing the parties of the two governments that have a degree of responsibility for this part of the UK. So we now have Michael Kusznir, who is representing the Conservatives.
It's a pleasure to be here in Glasgow representing Scotland's strong opposition and Scotland's next government, Ruth Davidson's Scottish Conservatives. My thanks to Gary Patterson for organising tonight and Sir John for ably moderating it. I'd like to begin with a bit of audience participation, if I may. Can I ask how many people voted to leave in the referendum? Maybe less than the 33% in Glasgow who voted to leave. How many people voted to remain? It's quite a lot of people. And perhaps if you were able to vote in the 2014 independence referendum, if you voted to separate ourselves from the rest of the United Kingdom, you voted yes to independence, can you put your hand up? Okay, so there's quite a few people voted yes in that debate. But can you just imagine if, God forbid, we had voted for Scottish independence in 2014 and years later we still had politicians trying to annul that result? Can you imagine the anger and the backlash against that willingness to override the votes of people? Because that analogy is no different from the situation we are in here today. We need to get on and deliver Brexit. We need to deliver a deal which works for the whole of Scotland. A deal which frees our fishermen from the hated common fisheries policy, a policy which has destroyed communities in the northeast of our country, and a deal which allows our businesses to go out there and trade with the world. Now, you've already heard quite a few speakers today, and I did a hustings in Perth this week, and it was all very similar. A mishmash, if I will, of we need a second referendum, and independence will solve all our problems. If you think getting ourselves out of the European Union has been difficult, can you imagine the difficulty of getting ourselves out of 300 years of shared history with our United Kingdom? Unlike the other parties, the Scottish Conservatives are the only major party in Scotland who are absolutely committed to respecting the will of the people and implementing Brexit. I believe that we need to deliver a deal which frees our fishermen, allows our businesses to go out and trade in the rest of the world. We need a sensible Brexit deal that allows Scotland to get on and deal with the matters which really concern people. We need to sort out Scotland's public services after 12 years of failed SNP policy. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want a positive vision for Scotland, not one of these people who don't seem to have a positive vision for Scotland outside of the European Union, then vote Scottish Conservative next Thursday.
Okay, last but by no means least is Alex Kerr, who is representing the SNP.
Okay. I'm just going to start very quickly by addressing what Michael said about the analogy that he made between Brexit and Scottish independence. There is one key difference, and the key difference is that Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, unlike your analogy. So, anyway, I'll come back to that. First of all, I'd like to thank Greater Scotland and the Model European Union for hosting tonight's Hustings. I'm delighted to be back at Strathclyde actually. I used to be a student here to share the SNP's vision for Scotland with us. Our message is absolutely clear. Scotland voted to remain in the EU by a substantial majority. As a national party of Scotland, it is our duty and responsibility to make sure our country's voice is heard by rejecting Brexit, calling for Article 50 to be revoked, and pushing for a people's vote on the option to remain. These elections give us yet another opportunity to send a clear signal to Westminster that we reject our Tory Brexit and that we want Scotland to continue to work as part of the European family of nations. The EU is crucial to Scotland's success. I'm standing in this election because not only did my country vote to remain, but the vast majority of young people, like myself, also voted to remain. In fact, in Glasgow it was 7 to 10. So for us, Europe represents opportunity, it represents freedom, and it represents prosperity. The benefits of EU membership for young people are vast. As European citizens, we have the right to live, work and study across the European continent. This is especially important for students who have for decades benefited from projects such as Erasmus, a life-changing opportunity directly funded by the EU, and I'm sure many of you in here will know friends who've been on that project or have been on it yourself. Scotland's story as part of the EU is a positive one. Unfortunately, the hateful politics of UKIP and the Brexit Party and the internal divisions of Tories and Labour have put all of this at risk for all of us. The damage it's already caused to the Scottish economy and the damage that it could potentially cause further down the line is completely unforgivable, and they should all be ashamed of themselves. The economic impact of Brexit is of course only part of this sorry tale. The EU encourages and facilitates cooperation between states on big issues such as climate change, which is so important to our future as young people. In Scotland, the SNP government has made huge progress on tackling climate change with ambitious targets and legal enforcements to ensure we meet the most powerful climate change legislation in the entire world at the moment. We're also a world leader in renewable technology, and the expertise that we've had in this field could allow Scotland to lead the world to a greener future, along with our European friends. The last 3 years have made me, and I'm sure many of you, incredibly angry. The complete disarray and incompetence which is spread throughout Westminster is as baffling as it is totally embarrassing. Whatever the outcome of this Brexit fiasco, one thing that has become apparent is that Scotland's interests are no longer served as a member of the United Kingdom. Throughout the process, Scotland's been ignored and sidelined. Scotland's future and the future of young people is as part of Europe. This is the future I believe in, it's the future that your representatives in Holyrood will fight for. A vote for the SNP in 20 May will send a clear signal. Scotland's for Europe and we're not leaving.
Right, that ends the first part of the evening, and thank you to all of you for keeping perfectly to time. Indeed, in 1 or 2 cases, even coming in under 3 minutes. So that's excellent. That gives us a chance to have a wider debate. So the second part then is for us tonight a chance to debate about why your vision of outcome of the Brexit process would be good for younger people. Now, I think it probably, in all fairness, given that the reason why this election is being held is because the UK government has so far proven unable to extricate us from the European Union. I think, Michael, perhaps therefore, to kick off this debate, why should anybody vote for the Conservatives, given that the party seems to have been unable to deliver Brexit, however much you might respect their friendly resort, and given that the Conservative Parliamentary Party seems to be so seriously divided on the subject?
Well, I think, John, if we get a strong team of Conservative MEPs, we're a hard-nosed bunch, and we get the best deal out of Europe, as we have done on...
Yes, but Michael, any piece will not be responsible for negotiating our future relationship. Probably now the person who will be responsible is whoever, and we don't know who it is elected by the Conservative Party to succeed Theresa May.
It could be Boris Johnson. But Theresa May isn't leaving until we get this withdrawal agreement passed, and obviously it's coming before the House of Commons, in June. And I was just speaking this morning to the Prime Minister's personal private secretary, Andrew Bowie, and I think they're very positive that it's going to pass this time.
There aren't very many in this room, but we are widecasting. What do you say to Leave voters? What do you say to Leave voters who voted in favour of leaving, expected the result of the referendum to be not only to be respected but to be delivered, but then discovering that actually it seems as though the Conservative Party cannot deliver? Why should they continue to vote for it?
Well, I don't think it's that the Conservatives cannot deliver it. It's that we have so many MPs in the House of Commons who are unwilling to vote for a withdrawal agreement. The Labour Party but the Labour Party are ignoring the will of so many of their voters when there's so many Leave constituents, and they want to rerun this referendum over again. The Conservative Party put forward with Theresa May a withdrawal agreement which delivers for business, which gets us out of the European Union, and it's just a shame that so many people, our MPs, are not voting for a deal which delivers this result.
So are you for or against the Northern Ireland backstop?
I think if we get a backstop and we get a deal with a negotiated deal after we get the withdrawal agreement through, then if the backstop isn't implemented, then we'll be okay.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Did I catch you correctly that you're saying that we should pass an agreement that contains the backstop but then not implement it?
Well, obviously the backstop would come into place if we didn't get a trading
right,
agreement.
but is it not the case that the kind of Brexit that we can negotiate in the second phase of the negotiations is effectively constrained by the Northern Ireland backstop? That basically we have to come to an agreement with the European Union that is such that the European Union will accept that the integrity of the single market is not undermined by by having an open border in Northern Ireland, which therefore means almost undoubtedly close regulatory alignment, at least for Northern Ireland, as well as some kind of customs arrangement.
Well, I think that the deal which the Prime Minister has negotiated, we are going to have some closeness with the European Union anyway, and I think I take a more positive approach than perhaps other people do, that we are going to get this deal over the line, and we're not going to encourage these sort of issues with the Northern Ireland border.
Okay, Craig, the other party that's clearly has a crucial role in all of this, and indeed has spent 6 weeks negotiating with the government, apparently to come to no conclusion. So, can you explain to people why apparently a Labour Brexit does not need to go to the public for endorsement, but a Tory Brexit does? If, as Keir Starmer was saying on the Today programme this morning, that the government should have the self-confidence to put its deal to the public, should not exactly the same logic apply to any deal that any future Labour government might manage to negotiate?
Well, firstly, I wasn't in the room where it happened, so I wasn't part of the negotiations, but from what I understand is that the negotiations were ended in good faith, firstly, but the Conservatives were unwilling to move on their red lines again. Now, the Conservatives are saying one of the main issues was because of the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer has put forward that we thought there should be a second referendum or confirmatory referendum. Now, that isn't an unwise suggestion. However, as I go back to say, as I said in my opening remarks, until the arithmetic in the Parliament allows for a second referendum, we're going to continue this impasse. There had been 2 votes. Now, going back to what you said earlier, firstly, Brexit will be decided by MPs in Westminster. They will not be decided by MEPs. That's why I'm concerned that people treat this as a second referendum. The second referendum might well come. That depends on how the negotiations go next week. But I would just say to the Conservative panellist, Theresa May is going, and Theresa May is going in a couple of weeks. Theresa May should have gone months ago, but Theresa May's selfish approach has led us to where we now are.
Craig, with all due respect, I think we know the Prime Minister is going. What I think we're still not entirely sure about is whether the Labour Party is or is not now, given where we are at, in favour of holding some kind of second referendum.
But as I said twice now, John,
I think you said, quote, it would not be unwise.
No,
does that mean you're in favour of it?
No, sorry, the Labour Party has already voted twice for a second referendum. The arithmetic did not pass. Do you know, it's part of our manifesto, it was part of our conference agreement. We have voted twice. Jeremy Corbyn has voted twice for a second referendum in the Parliament, and the arithmetic wasn't there. Now,
so are you now therefore saying the Labour Party now gives up on the idea of second
not at
referendum?
all. Not at all. But if we are saying that Theresa May cannot continually bring her same deal back, then at some point you have to say, unless the arithmetic has changed and unless there is something quite obvious to show that the parliamentary arithmetic has changed, then all you're doing is weakening the cause for a second referendum by bringing it back to be voted down a third time. Now remember, there are people in the Labour Party who, as someone pointed out, represent very leave areas. The likelihood of them following the whip, as the first two votes were whipped, is unlikely. Do you know the Conservatives and the right wing are very unlikely to support it? You have 4 SNP politicians abstaining, so that's not going to go over. You have Lib Dems, you have someone from the Lib Dem resigning their party whip. So unless the arithmetic changes at some point soon,
so is the conclusion that we should draw from your statement is that the Labour Party is probably as incapable as the Conservative Party is delivering Brexit?
That is why we have been calling for a general election, because a general election will change the arithmetic of the Parliament.
And where does your party currently stand in the Westminster polling intentions?
In the lead.
Yes, but not very high is the problem you have.
A majority will give us the current poll.
And as you know as well as I do, unless you can do much better in Scotland, you have very little chance of getting an overall majority. Okay, all right. Let's move on slightly more widely then. Maybe Peter and Maggie, I got the impression that when you gave your opening statements, I got the impression that of a slightly different vision of Europe. So I want to kind of develop this, and I think particularly now get us onto the question of why your vision of Europe is of particular interest to younger people. So let me explain. Peter, the impression I got from your vision is that you are a fully signed up member of what Liam might call the capitalist club, and that your vision of our future relationship with the European Union is we're inside it, and basically we allow the globalized forces of immigration and the single market, etc., to operate much as they have at the moment, and maybe even further. Whereas Maggie seemed to be wanting to reform, she's quite keen on immigration, but I'm not quite sure she's as keen on maintaining the market in its current form as Peter is. So maybe I've got this wrong, and both of you can correct me. So, but Peter, I mean, are you basically saying that we should carry on in the EU, and we should carry on in the EU in much the same way as we have in the past? Maybe even you are of the view that actually we should sign up to Schengen, that we should sign up to the Euro, and we should be absolutely fully paid up members of the European Union. And I mean, is that correct? And if so, can you explain to the audience why you hold that view?
I'm glad that you give me that question, because it's actually a fundamental question about the future vision for Europe. Now, we don't buy into the Schengen argument, we don't buy into the Euro argument, but what we do buy into is that Europe is a global organisation. It has the ability to go out and negotiate with very big entities elsewhere. Now, this is quite important, that we stay and remain part of these global entities, but reforming the bits that don't work. So that's the ChangeUK vision, is that some bits of Europe work extremely well. So when you look at things like they've done on the internet and privacy and GDPR, these are things which are transnational issues which have been fundamentally negotiated from the EU. But there are things that don't work very well. I can use my own example of air traffic control as being something where they had a vision to have a much better air traffic control system. They've spent $4 billion on it and actually achieved absolutely nothing. So I would definitely want to see some of these things reformed.
But presumably you would accept that we would still want to be part of a European air traffic control system. I'm not even sure Nigel Farage is opposed to that. But
no, I'm pretty sure that Nigel Farage wouldn't want to do that, because otherwise he'd find it extremely difficult to get to the US, bearing in mind that he has to go over Ireland. So that could be a little tricky if you're not part of the transnational structure. The difficulty is, though, that the regulatory systems that operate within the EU require membership of EASA. EASA is the European Aviation Safety Agency, and you are either a European member state or you're a third country state. And third country state means that you're no longer part of the voting community to make those standards and definitions correct. So the UK Civil Aviation Authority is a key constituent of that European institution, EASA. And I'll give you a really good example of it. The Airbus A380 was certificated for flight globally by the UK Civil Aviation Authority on behalf of the European Union. Without it, we would not have got that aircraft airborne. So the UK plays a constituent part of all of those mechanisms. Now, we used to have the European Medicines Agency here, of which Kathy is well aware because she's a pharmacist, and we had that here in the UK. All of the key states had something, and yet we've lost it. We've lost that influence on how to drive forward some of the key constituents of European medical developments.
Okay, Peter, so you've told us about why we should mess up organisations. Let me go back to the first part of your answer.
Yeah.
I mean, am I to take away from that, and is the audience meant to take away from this, is that although you present yourself as a pro-Remain party, you are in fact in favour of what many people would describe as the UK semi-detached membership of the European Union, as opposed to being a fully signed up member, and that even under ChangeUK, the United Kingdom is going to be, as it were, in the outer rim rather than anywhere close to the inner rim of the European Union.
It's what I understand is called a two-step Europe. So it's a two-step.
And we're in the slow lane, is that right?
Yeah, and we are in the slow lane at the moment, and really that move towards Europeanisation, the closer cooperation which was signalled by the Treaty of Lisbon, that was brought in by a Labour government, has not really been transformed here into the UK as much as it has been in the rest of Europe. So when I've been working in other countries, and Ireland is the one that I'm working in at the moment, they adopt it much quicker. It makes things much simpler to make decisions on, and certainly things like movement of capital, freedom movement of capital, I can do in Ireland in literally minutes, which normally takes me anything up to 3 to 4 days to do between sterling and the euro. So we're still in the slow lane. Okay, so the obvious follow-up is, well, given the vision you're articulating, are you not really somebody who's saying actually we should be in Schengen and we should be in the euro? My personal view is that I'd quite like to see a move towards more Schengen. I think that borders create problems and they create bureaucracy. So I would quite like to see a movement away from it. And you referred to my time as a police officer back in the 1990s to 1998, and I actually worked on the UK border. I was actually an intelligence officer that was tracking serious and organised crime. And the border issue is a major problem even back then. Trying to police borders when you've got a border the size of the United Kingdom against the threats that we currently face without international cooperation is a fundamental problem. But I recognise that the UK has decided that it will not bring in Schengen.
Okay, all right, Maggie. I'm kind of guessing that at least one part of Peter's vision, which is that the European Union is an organisation that facilitates air travel across the European continent, is not necessarily one that you'd be fully signed up to. And if I'm correct in making that assumption, is your message to the young people in this audience that basically they should give up on the plane, and if they do indeed want to take advantage of something like Erasmus in somewhere quite a long way away, like Athens or Budapest, they're going to have to get on the train?
There's quite a lot to unpack in that.
Oh, I hope so.
I'll do what I can. First, firstly, as some of you might know, I was born and brought up in Zimbabwe. My mum still lives in Zimbabwe, and I fly to see her because otherwise it would take me months to get there and back, and by boat and all sorts of other things. So am I against air travel in its totality? Absolutely not. That's not what we're saying. Firstly, the Greens have always said we need to tax air travel appropriately. At the moment, it is not taxed. It is not taxed the same way as petrol and diesel is taxed, and that's just wrong. That's just plain wrong. We also need to focus where we apply any kind of disincentive to fly, and it's not all people seeking to travel for knowledge exchange, for study, for that kind of thing, but focus on the business people. For instance, those who fly from Glasgow or Edinburgh to London 3 or 4 times a week. They don't need, it's actually, having done that train journey often enough, that should be the way, that should be the focus of where we're going. So I was hugely pleased to see the SNP finally, in the Scottish Government, finally move away from their policy to scrap air passenger duty a couple of weeks ago. It's been a long-term campaign on behalf of the Greens.
But isn't it enough been the, I mean, you have been laying out this vision of the European Union as a place that encourages freedom of movement. Isn't one of the costs of freedom of movement that more people travel by whatever means? I mean, frankly, if we get on the train, we still have a carbon imprint. So isn't there a potentially contradiction here between your vision of a Europe where certainly we have you're open to migratory flows, and a Europe where you're trying to reduce the continent's carbon imprint?
Absolutely not. There is no conflict in that at all. And if you have a look at our manifesto, one of the points you will see is, in the same way as the Scottish Greens have a policy for free public transport in Scotland, so we want to campaign for that across Europe. Where it has worked, where it's been implemented either as a pilot or as a longer term policy, it not only reduces carbon imprint because people can make the choices to use cleaner transport methods, but also it reduces air pollution. And so it reduces cost on health services because fewer people suffer from cardio and respiratory problems. It reduces the impact on other public services, other services that we all use. And so that's, if we're focusing just on transport, then that's one of the things that the Scottish Greens are very, very clear we need to shift. But we need to think about how we do things differently. I think very few of us now operate in an age where we don't communicate across continental boundaries without travelling. Most of us, whether it's through these devices that we carry around with us, whether it's in our work, we communicate in different ways across continental boundaries all the time now. And it's about making the most of those, making those more effective, having a greater impact of those communications to reduce some of the unnecessary.
Okay, very quickly. Euro, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Schengen?
Schengen, we are in favour of open borders, and we see Schengen as a step
all right, okay, fine. So you're a bit less semi-detached than we are at the moment, but not fully signed up.
Can I come back to a couple of points that have been made?
Well, let me get some others come in, and I'm sure you'll get a chance to come back again on what other people have said. Kyle. One of the things that we know about immigration, and it's been, it's nothing particularly to do with the European Union. It's if you've ever studied any economic history, it's a persistent pattern. Immigration is something that younger people do. It's how they often improve their lives. It's also the way in which they widen their experience. So why should the United Kingdom, and particularly for this audience, why should younger people embrace the idea, not just simply that it's more difficult for people from the European Union to come here, but the likely consequence that it's going to be more difficult for young people from this country to be able to go and work and study in the rest of the European Union?
Well, I think you can see from Britain's relationship with other countries that there's plenty of ways that students can come here who are members of countries which are in the European Union. So we've got quite a lot of students who come from all over the world, especially to Glasgow. It's quite a diverse city when it comes to its student alumni. We've got lots of people who come from China. There's one of my best friends, flatmate, is from Spain, which is in the European Union. So what we've got is, there is a way of mixing the two of them. scholarships and having people from all over the world can happen without being a member of the European Union.
Okay, so let's take this idea further forward then. So are UKIP then, if we leave the European Union, in favour of the United Kingdom continue to participate in the Erasmus programme for student exchange?
I think it would need to be negotiated.
Yeah, but are you in favour of
think
the
that
United
it-
Kingdom trying to negotiate that objective?
If we can get a satisfying deal, then yeah, I think
Okay,
that would
and
be-
are you in favour,
But-
again because we're in a university institution, is UKIP in favour of the United Kingdom continue to participate in the work of the European Research Council?
I think the money could be spent here rather than being spent there. I think the problem with
So what would you say to the many scientists in this institution who would argue that actually that international standard, international endeavour requires international collaboration, and that therefore as a result universities in Scotland need to be able to collaborate with universities in the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Spain or wherever?
well,
How can we nationalise
How can we
international endeavour?
international endeavour? I think the money that we spend on all of these programmes can be better spent on things which are actually like priorities too.
The United Kingdom makes a profit on its involvement in scientific exchange because of the quality of our universities. Actually, people from other countries are desperately collaborating with us, and it's one of the few bits of the European Union where actually the amount we get out of it is greater than the amount that we pay in. So why is there a problem?
On that issue, I think the United Kingdom would either have to see once it leaves if it would be worth staying. If it means that we would actually have a say in it, like if we had an institution where
Well, if we stay inside the European Union, we'll certainly have a say in it.
we would, but we'd also have a say in other things which the UK doesn't feel.
Okay, let's just move on then. So, you know, the United Kingdom is out of the European Union in 5 years, and under some terms and conditions that frankly none of us know as yet, because we've not hardly got more than about 10% through the negotiations. So what can you explain to this audience what that's going to enable this country to do that's going to make their lives better, as they in many cases will be embarking on, they've maybe been in a job for 2 or 3 years, etc., etc. How is this country going to be better as a result of leaving that this audience is going to appreciate?
Well, I think we can elect politicians who are going to be more accountable to our votes. There's a lot of things politicians in this country simply can't change because of the European Union. And I think...
So how should they change? So what should they be doing with this power to make this country better? What is it they can do that they can't do at the moment?
Well, we can't change certain things around VAT, which you cannot do while being in the European Union. We can't...
Well, there are limitations. You can't reduce VAT below 5%, yeah. Okay, so what are you in favour of reducing VAT below 5% on?
On certain things.
Such as?
Domestic fuel is one of the things that's
Okay.
used as a policy on that.
Okay, so you're saying to them they can heat their student flats a little more easily?
Well, it's a living necessity. It's something that shouldn't be taxed extra. People need it to live, and heating prices are astronomical for a lot of people, especially young people who have never tried themselves or struggle for work. And I think there's a lot of economic policies which the UK should do. Being in or being outside the European Union could benefit young people. I think one of them is trying to minimise the amount we see in our contracts and try to get people into more secure work would be a big one. I think a lot of young people find themselves between jobs which are very unsustainable because there's 0-hour contracts and they don't know what kind of shifts they're going to get, and it leaves them struggling for cash.
Okay, all right. Alex, if indeed it's a good idea at some stage in the Brexit process, presumably not too far off, that we should have a second referendum to decide whether or not we wish to go ahead, would it not be a good idea if we were to have a second independence referendum in which a majority of people in Scotland voted in favour, for us not then to have a subsequent referendum in which Scotland could decide on whether or not it was in favour of the deal that had been negotiated with the UK government?
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah,
Everyone
absolutely
back
fine.
as well? Good. Well, I mean, the main thing that we're coming at this from is the Scottish angle in terms of Scotland's interests. So it's not about overturning democracy, it's about respecting the equal partnership of nations across the UK, the 4 constituent countries, which we were sold in 2014 as that was what we were staying in. So Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain the European Union, and that's the result that we're looking to have respected. So that would be matter.
So why then are you in favour of a second independence referendum if you think that the results of a referendum should be respected?
No, that's a real question. The independence referendum...
Because there's no debate that Scotland also voted to stay inside the United Kingdom.
You're entirely right. You're entirely right there. In terms of what we were promised in that referendum, was not exactly the case, but more importantly, it's about protecting Scotland's interests, protecting our place in Europe as part of the European family of nations, and giving us a way out of this Brexit mess that's been caused by Labour incompetence, Tories' obsession with ending freedom movement, and the Brexiteer fanatics at the end of the table there.
Okay, so what's the vision of Scotland in Europe as Scotland becomes independent that you have? So I've already posed this to a number of the other panellists. I take it it's Euro no, is that correct?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Euro, no to the Euro.
Yeah, so we actually had
okay.
a big debate in the currency in terms of...
Yeah, I think you all read that.
Yeah. So pretty positive. Our plan is we'll get 6 tests. We had a whole bunch of economists look at this and drop the plans.
Yeah.
It's to keep the pound until all of these 6 tests are met.
Yeah.
Which would ensure that if we were moving, the plan is to eventually transition to an independent Scottish currency, but only when all 6 of these tests have been met, drawn up by senior economists. And when these 6 tests are met, we'll move to...
You do realise, of course, that Gordon Brown also had 6 tests, and that was whether or not we should join the Euro or not.
Yeah, but I mean...
And they were devised to ensure that we didn't, but anyway.
Well, these tests are not devised to ensure. They're very reasonable guidelines.
So Schengen, yes or no?
The freedom of movement, yeah. We're all for it.
So you're in favour of joining the Schengen agreement? So you don't want border controls vis-a-vis the rest of the European Union?
We're in favour of freedom of movement across the Union.
Okay, so but if Scotland is independent and the United Kingdom, the rest of the United Kingdom is outside the European Union, presumably you therefore accept that we would have to have a Schengen border from Gretna Green to Berwick?
I mean, we don't know what the border situation is going to be. Personally, I think the UK will find itself in some kind of deal with the EU. I think it's just not sustainable for them otherwise.
But if Scotland is in Schengen and England and Wales is not in Schengen, you will need to have a Schengen border between England and Scotland.
We don't know what the situation is going to look like.
Okay, all right. Common fisheries policy, in or out?
Reform, essentially, the common fisheries policy. Because it currently doesn't work for Scottish fishermen, and that's been our position for a very long time.
So how is a tiny little country called Scotland going to have the clout inside the European Union, even as an independent member, to be able to change the common fisheries policy?
Well, working alongside with others. I mean, it's not a perfect system, but it's
no, because we have lots of fish and lots of water, and most European Union countries don't. So I'm not entirely sure what is the coalition of countries that's going to back you on this. I can't do that.
Well, again, that's something that our MEPs would find hard to change.
All right.
We'd have to work
alongside. Can I, as I haven't given him a chance, I'm going to give John a chance, and then I'm going to come to you, Maggie, and then I'll come to Liam, if that's all right. Okay. So, John, see if we can unpack the Democrat vision, because you're meant to be the party that's in favour and pro-European. So, as I've asked a number of other on this side of the argument, Euro, yes or no?
No, not currently, no.
Schengen, yes or no?
Personally, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because
Liberal Democrats still not in favour?
the present no, which is a regret to me, because if nothing else, Britain being an island hasn't made the slightest bit of difference to our border security in 400 years. There's a reason why every pub along the south coast of England is called the Smuggler's Arms, because people were getting over the border then. They're still getting over the border now. Speak to anybody at Gartcosh and the police service. So the idea that somehow our island status gives us a unique security from people moving is daft. So I'd rather be personally inside the Schengen information system. My mother-in-law from South America has to apply for a Schengen visa, and they have to ask every other country who neighbours the country you're flying into, whether they give permission for that person to come in. So there's a sophisticated system. I'd much rather have that than pretending we can do it all ourselves.
Okay, so somehow or another, we have decided to change our minds about Brexit. What's the European Union going to do in the next 5 years that's actually going to make life better for this audience?
Well, I mean, there's a whole range of areas. Of course, it depends what the Parliament looks like next week. But I mean, if you take the group that the Liberal Democrats are part of, the ALDE group, there's a whole range of policies there on climate, on transport, on connecting up more trans-European networks so that there is the possibility to travel in ways other than flying, at least within the European continent. There's a stronger commitment to international development and aid on precisely the point of migration. If you improve the standard of living for people in other parts of the world, there is less pressure to come here and live and work. It's the same as it was for the Brits who went abroad to work in the 1980s. One of the key policies which I'd like to see in the next 5 years is a common asylum policy. The whole underlying a lot of the rhetoric of the Brexit debate has been this uncertainty and these slightly dog-whistling messages about migration and about movement, which was all played on the back of something that was not actually economic migration, but was the single biggest movement of refugees in Europe since the Second World War, out of Syria. They weren't looking for jobs, they were looking not to get blown up. And yet our policy on that was to say, well, let 20,000 in over 5 years, we let in 5,000 over 5 years. That's less than a couple of rows at Hampden Park. So a common asylum policy so that the border countries closest don't have to deal with all the work or shuffle everybody through to the next one who doesn't, but actually have a common system of people discussing. I think, apart from anything else in terms of public acceptance and public understanding what Europe can do, that's a far more effective one than a lot of the frankly invisible but extremely effective technical and regulatory changes that are still there.
And if the UK does have a second referendum and it confirms the result of the first one, both in respect that a majority of the UK votes to leave, but Scotland votes to remain, would you then accept that Scotland should have the right to hold an independence referendum?
Not presently, no, because as I said at the beginning, in 2014 you had a very, very clear prospectus of what Scotland would look like as an independent country, and the country for
I think people were being told that if they wished to retain Scotland's membership of the European Union, they needed to vote no. They voted no, and then they discovered
so as I was about to say, so let's wait and see what the Brexit deal is. I'd rather have no deal. If we don't leave, I'd rather not have any more constitutional discussions for a very long time. But if there is a departure of some kind, then I think it's perfectly valid to have a constitutional debate in Scotland, but preferably have one that involves Northern Ireland, Wales, London and everybody else as well. But that can't happen until we know where we stand, which is why we're saying, if this is the best we can do after 3 years, let's stop, let's pause now, and let's come up with a more sophisticated system than simply saying we have to do it because we were told to do it, even though 3 years later we still haven't got the slightest idea what it looks like.
Okay, Maggie, you've been desperate to get in, but keep it fairly brief.
Well, just on 2 points. Firstly,
and then if others of you want to come in, I've still got to let Liam in, but yeah, sure.
Just a couple of points. Firstly, on fishing, you asked how Scotland, as a wee country in Europe, could get any better deal than we've already got at the moment. The UK didn't even bother to turn up to fishing negotiations as a member of the European Union. So we couldn't possibly get anything worse than what we've got at the moment. I think that's really, really important to know. The UK sold Scottish fishermen and fishing communities down the river, pardon the pun, by not even bothering to turn up to those discussions for a long time, because they traded that right to make the City of London the banking capital of Europe. And quite frankly, I know where my allegiances lie when I'm faced with that choice. Secondly, there's been a little bit of discussion about border posts and that kind of thing. If Scotland were independent, or if I would be very, very interested to hear people who think we should leave the EU, how they propose not having a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland on the island of Ireland. But if Scotland were to become independent, there would be somehow this awful border situation between Scotland and England. How is it one situation for the island of Ireland and a completely different situation for
because
the
the Republic of Ireland is not in Schengen. And there's a good reason why the Republic of Ireland is not in Schengen, it's because we're not in Schengen.
And all of that could change, but I think that there's something else about
But if we're going to be in Schengen,
if
we're going to be in Schengen, as Alex was suggesting, and the UK is not in the EU, you create a hard Schengen border. Yeah.
Oh, I think you'd see most of the rest of the UK desperate to follow us, and we probably would leave England alone, isolated on its own.
Can I just finish the point? I mean, to answer everybody's questions about Euro Schengen, the third one was fisheries. We need to remember that the current people who complain about the common fisheries policy are the 15% of North Sea whitefish fishermen. Go and ask a shellfish fisherman in the Western Isles of Scotland. Go and ask the freshwater fishermen on the west coast of Scotland what they think, and their attitude is entirely different. And then go on Maggie's point about who turns up. There is, of course, a particular party leader, first of UKIP and now of the all-wonderful Brexit Party, who turned up once in 45 times. He turned up in Strasbourg to take the money, but he didn't bother to go along the corridor to sit in the committees to defend the country he was there to defend.
Liam, I should give you a chance at this point. So where's the left perspective? And as you've gathered, we've kind of developed a bit of a theme here. So where does the left stand on the euro? And where does the left stand on Schengen? And where does the left stand on the common fisheries policy, which is of particular interest in this country?
When it comes to the euro, I think it's actually a more kind of wider and more fundamental point actually than just the euro, and trying to widen it out differently as to what kind of economic system that we will look to use across the EU. If you look at the institutions of the EU from a left perspective, they're fundamentally pro-business, and the EU as an institution, as I mentioned in my introduction, is fundamentally for the interests of capital. And I think when somebody else was given an answer in response, you'd mentioned yourself, John, that I might chip in at that point and say, oh, well, you're supporting the big, I think it was the big bosses club, I think it was that you used. So in terms of the euro, it's probably a wider discussion that the left would.
But how do you so if we take as your starting point that you would, I mean, roughly speaking, want to enhance the role of the state vis-a-vis big business, doesn't that imply that you want to make the European Union a more powerful institution than it is at the moment? Because presumably if you wish to control international big business, you have to do it at an international level, and therefore isn't your vision, in fact, perhaps the one that would be in favour of a more powerful European Union than I think I've even heard from the most ardent of the remainers on the panel so far?
Well, again, it comes back to the nature of what that institution that is the European Union would be looking to do and use that power for. If that power was, speak from a personal point of view, if that power was going to be used to benefit the vast majority of the 500 million citizens of the European Union, then I've got no personal objections to a European Union that has more powers than it does currently. For me, it's more a fundamental question about what those powers are used for and in whose interests are those powers used. Okay, Schengen? As a socialist, I would love that we had no borders and that freedom of movement was respected across the world just the same as it is.
Okay, but the SSP is also in favour of independence, yes?
Yes, correct.
So do you accept, therefore, that if we are in Schengen and England is not, that there might have to be a Schengen border between Gretna and Berwick?
This is what this comes back to,
because although the European Union has freedom of movement inside, it protects its borders vis-a-vis everybody else.
Yeah. No, you're correct, and a large frustration for myself with the EU was the initial response to those who were fleeing terror and persecution in places like Syria and Iraq. So you're right in saying that, but the dynamics at the moment are so fluid that come a second independence referendum, it's a hypothetical question at the moment that I can't answer fully because we don't know what the situation is going to be come the time a second referendum is.
It might be a little different. Right, okay. Peter, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think in addition to your point on common fisheries policy, There's also the agricultural policies, which definitely come in there. And I live in Port Lamont in Argyll. There's more sheep in that area than there is people. And those sheep are there for one particular reason. Nearly all of them, when they go for slaughter, are sent to France. So the Scottish industry, what we're hearing from the farmers is big, is that the Scottish industry is supported by its exports out to the EU, and if we move out of the European system, how are they going to do that? Now, the farmers need around about 2 years lead time to know what flocks they're going to have, how much beef they're going to buy in. It takes around about 2 years to produce a bull that goes for slaughter, and all of that is going to have a very big effect on the farming community here in Scotland that will see the same sort of wipeout, in my view, that the fisheries team have seen. So these issues are absolutely fundamental to business here in Scotland.
Okay, all right. I'd like now to move on to the third part of the discussion. One or two of the questions that I spotted are, I think, sometimes raising issues that have been raised in discussion, but they're particularly pertinent to some of the individuals, the others who may want to kick in. So I think, Michael, here's an important one for you. So this is a student who's currently doing social sciences at Glasgow, and he's saying that, I'm sorry, I don't know whether it's he or she. So they are saying that they're fancy doing an exchange to another country as part of their degree. Erasmus is part of the EU. So basically, I think the question to you, Michael, is if indeed Mrs. May's deal were to go through, will this student be able to go on an Erasmus scheme or not?
Well, I think certainly there is a lot of support, and we've seen that across the panel, and there's cross-party support in the House of Commons not to dilute the ability of people from this country to go abroad and to engage in educational programmes. So yes, I think people will be going abroad and undertaking the Erasmus programme.
But do you accept that at the moment we don't know the answer to that question because we've not negotiated part 2 of the exit agreement?
No, I agree with that.
Okay, so, but can you then assure the student that it is a negotiating objective of the UK government that we should remain a member of the Erasmus scheme?
Well, sadly, John, I'm not sitting in the UK government, so I can't tell you what they are negotiating on a day-to-day basis. But the Prime Minister has made it clear that this is going to be part of our negotiations, and that she wants to put this into place.
Do you think Boris Johnson is? I think maybe might think that the views of Boris Johnson are now more relevant than those of Theresa May. So, do you think Boris Johnson is in favour of the UK staying inside the Erasmus scheme?
Well, Boris Johnson has taken numerous positions on numerous things multiple times, but on immigration and on education, he has been, I would say, perhaps more liberal than he is painted as.
Okay, all right. Does anybody else want to give a student, right, John and then Alex, and then we'll move on?
It's very simple. I mean, this is coming from the government that says no deal is better than a bad deal. No deal means no Erasmus. Full stop. End of. There is arrangements to continue Erasmus if we manage to get a deal of some description. But the current default situation is all of that stops in Halloween or wherever it is. And Boris Johnson is one of the most vocal advocates of no deal. And just to make it clear, both the Brexit Party and UKIP party policies are to pull completely out of Erasmus. So we need to be clear exactly what we're talking about here. Those who say no deal is better than a bad deal, or we can just crash out to WTO, all of that goes. And it goes overnight.
Alex, and then
I mean, the real difficulty you have with anything that has been negotiated by the Tory government is they are not a coherent bloc. You can't trust anything they say because it'll change overnight almost. In terms of Erasmus, the SNP will always fight to protect Erasmus, will always fight to protect a positive immigration system for ourselves, like a post-study work visa, which was taken away by the UK government. The only other thing I would say to Michael is, at the rate of resignations, you might well find yourself in the UK government soon, so just be ready.
Peter, sorry, we'll move on.
Yeah, just to sort of figure that Erasmus, if you want to be able to travel to these other countries, you actually need the agreement of the EU to do it. Air service agreements, when I used to do them, take approximately 6 to 7 months to negotiate, and during that time you cannot operate. So don't think that no deal
But I
Brexit
think
just means it keeps on going, because it
But in
doesn't.
fairness, do we not need to point out that there were arrangements put in place to keep air travel going for at least 6 months in the wake of no deal, yes?
Yeah, there is interim arrangements, but
Yeah.
those interim arrangements are considerably more limited than it is today.
Okay, right, Craig, I think somebody in the audience might have been listening quite closely to what you said, or maybe they misunderstood. So let me just read this verbatim. When did Labour put forward compromises which made a provision for single market membership? This questioner thought that Mr Corbyn was opposed to our remaining part of the single market.
So we want to be part of a membership of a single market, just as we want to be part of a customs union. Now that will have to be negotiated, of course it will. We, again, as I said earlier, had hoped by now. We have tried everything we can. There would have been a snap general election. We're still holding out on that hope every day that there might be, and then we would have to negotiate that. But again, I come back to, we have had indicative votes in the Parliament, and every indicative vote, including a single market, a customs union, a second referendum, or customs 2.0 should I say, they've all failed. They haven't got the arithmetic. It's part of the Labour Party manifesto, it's part of Labour Party policy, it's what we have negotiated in the Parliament over the last 2 years as well, but again, we have failed to be able to deliver.
But Craig, I think what this audience will now want to know is, okay, you have a general election, Jeremy Corbyn is Prime Minister, and we have at least not reached the end of the Brexit process. What kind of deal does Labour Party want? What do you mean by being in a single market if you're not in the single market? Do you mean EFTA? In what way are we going to be in a single market without being in the single market?
Well, we have to have those negotiations. That's up to Jeremy Corbyn and his team.
I'm asking you what the Labour Party will be trying to achieve in those negotiations. Presumably 2.5 years after the referendum, the Labour Party at least has some idea of what it would want to achieve in the negotiations if it should achieve its objective of turning this government out in general election.
Yeah, well, again, there are many benefits of the current single market, but it isn't perfect, it's not ideal, and it needs to be renegotiated. Do you know, of course, for us, trade is so important. That's why when Theresa May risks putting a hard border in Ireland, do you know, and not only that, but do you know, with the fact that Theresa May in the first place went into an informal coalition with the DUP, put at risk the Good Friday Agreement that the Labour Party negotiated. So therefore trade is absolutely vital for us moving forward, but it's not perfect either. Do you know, we're talking about fishing, we're talking about industry as well that's important to Britain. And do you know, one of the reasons I think that many people voted leave, and do you know, I live in Clackmannanshire, there's always this sort of illusion that the Scotland on the whole, of course, voted to remain. But there are places in Clackmannanshire that I live, in Kilsnotton, that overwhelmingly voted to leave. We have to try to bring the country back together and just say status quo as it is fine for everyone. That's not the case. We had a referendum of a whole for the UK, just to suggest that one place, Scotland, we should just then take Scotland's voice and ignore Wales, Northern Ireland, England, or if we're breaking it down, then we should ignore places in Glasgow as well that voted overwhelmingly to leave. And very working class places, people feel let down by the current European Union. Unless we reform, if we're going to remain, and we may well very remain, I think that looks, going forward, a very strong possibility, because I think we might end up back at the ballot box in a couple of months, because I think this Tory government may collapse, and I think the Labour government, what we hear today, will move to a second referendum quite soon, if we can get the mathematical arithmetic that a general election, someone saying no, don't have it, if we can get the mathematical arithmetic that a general election would deliver.
Alex.
Well, it's funny that he's talking about arithmetic, I'm totally honest with you. Every single local authority area in Scotland voted Remain. Every single normally, I mean, I think it'd be disingenuous, not so much yourself, but I was at Hustings on Monday and I was speaking, David Martin was talking, and you know, I feel quite sorry for folk like David Martin, who are really believe in the European project, but the party they're in, it's not them that's making the manifesto, it's Jeremy Corbyn, who is basically a Eurosceptic. It's fair enough that they wouldn't want to talk about Brexit, they want to talk about other issues, because they don't have a position on Brexit. The one thing they are clear on though is they do not want freedom of movement. They want to end single market access. So, I think you mentioned something earlier about SNPs. There were some abstentions in the second referendum vote, which is again very, very disingenuous, because the abstentions were for medical reasons.
No, they weren't. No, sorry, they were not. Pete Wisher was not for medical reason.
Yeah. So
Angus McNeil was not for medical reason.
Right. I'm not getting into that kind of stuff right now.
Absolutely, no wonder.
But the clear thing is, vote SNP in the 23rd of May, and we will protect freedom of movement.
Okay, yes, Craig, I think...
Sorry.
In replying, could you clarify the Labour position on freedom of movement?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Labour Party believes, firstly, that classing people as unskilled workers because they earn under £30,000 is disastrous for this country. We rely upon so many people coming in. As I used this example the other day, and I'll use it again because he's here, but my partner is a doctor, and he relies upon foreign workers being here in order to have our NHS. So yes, we can't just have, we do have to have legislation, we have to have policy in order to make sure that there isn't just complete everyone coming here, because there is absolutely nothing wrong with immigrants. There's nothing wrong with immigrants. However, we have to make sure that as a country we are able to support everyone. Now, I think what you're saying just there, we are the cause of many of the conflicts in the world. So we have a duty, we have a responsibility. However, we have also to protect the safety of this country as well. So you can have the free movement as you have just now across Europe, but also we have to protect our nation as well. That is very important. It might be easy to say what is wrong, but I can't just walk into America. I can't just go anywhere either. So therefore, it is important that we have the correct legislation.
Just so that none of us have got the wrong end of the stick. My interpretation of what you've just said is that the Labour Party is opposed to maintaining the freedom of movement. Is that correct?
No, not in Europe, no.
Right, so you're opposed to maintaining freedom of movement within the European Union. So therefore we cannot be made members of the single market. Is that, that's correct?
No.
Okay, so can you clarify for us then?
Yeah, my understanding going forward is that we would want to keep, the European freedom of movement as much as possible. I may have misunderstood that, and if I have, I apologise.
Well, freedom of movement basically means that any European Union citizen has the right to go and live and work in any other European Union country so long as they can sustain it.
Yes. I do not oppose that.
All right, okay, fine, all right.
Yeah, but the party
does.
The party does.
John and then Maggie, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, the important point John just raised is to live and work. The current freedom of movement is not the universal freedom just to go wherever you like and take whatever benefits people would like to accuse people of taking. It's to go and work. And I went and worked in 2 separate countries, and you know how many questions I got from those countries, which were both more prosperous in the part of the country I went to than the part of Scotland I left. Do you know how many questions I got about why I was there, what I was doing, whose job I was taking? Not a single one. Not a single question in 9 years did anybody make me feel uncomfortable. And this is the problem. We're pretending that there is an issue with freedom of movement for people coming in here. We didn't ever complain when, those of you old enough to remember, Auf Wiedersehen, Pet, when brickies were going to I'm sure I'm my age, when brickies were going to Germany, nobody said that this is a terrible economic migrants.
But John, you would surely accept that the UK has, by its own historical standards, experienced very high levels of net inward migration, both from the European Union and from outside the European Union, in the last decade and a half or so.
It's had high net migration from within the European Union. You know what? All of those people have been working. They've come here to work. They've contributed to the taxes. They're working in the NHS, and they're doing a huge amount of contribution. I don't see.
But how then do you respond to the older person living somewhere like Boston, which has hitherto been largely culturally homogenous, and who suddenly experience a relatively high level of network migration from Eastern Europe with the inevitable cultural consequences of white Hispanics.
But the net migration from Eastern Europe is not bringing big problems of cultural migration. When people start talking about culture, they're not talking about European culture, they're talking about something else. And that's where we need to be attentive to it. Because most of the people coming from Eastern Europe are filling churches and filling jobs. What people who start to go on about migration tend to be doing is dog whistling about people coming from further afield.
Okay, Maggie.
Villages in Romania.
I mean, I think just to pick up on a couple of things Craig said. Firstly, the position of Labour, well, firstly, they've been all over on freedom of movement, but it's quite clear from the manifesto and from other things that Jeremy Corbyn has said that they do want freedom of movement to end. And it was a Labour MP, Keith Vaz, who drove around London, went to Heathrow to keep an eye on immigration. You know, it's quite frankly appalling to me that the Labour Party can be talking about controls on immigration, controlling immigration, and yet trying to say that we want you to be able to go to Europe, you know, on Erasmus schemes and on other schemes from that. It's so one-sided, and it's so anti-socialist as well, which appalls me.
Okay, just that line here. Sorry, it's Liam, I think.
Yeah, that's
somebody who claims to be a socialist.
Maggie can still
Sorry,
there. I was going to come in on that. I was also going to come in on when it was mentioned, which is actually why I think Labour's got itself in a bit of a mess on this, is because there's this idea that the working class areas overwhelmingly voted to leave, but the Labour Party, as the party organised, Labour has a responsibility to say that any Brexit deal, as currently constituted, that I can see, the people who are going to pay the biggest price for that deal is going to be working people, regardless of their and for me, the Labour position on freedom of movement, it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out to the politics peddled by the likes of Farage and the left as a whole, actually, and I'll include myself and my party in this as well. We need to do more to fight back against this narrative that that immigration is a negative for the country. In terms of economics, they economically benefit our society. Personally, I think that socially and culturally as well, we're better off with freedom of movement. So I think the Labour Party has got responsibility as the organised party of Labour to be clear here that in the event of Brexit, the people who pay the price is working people, and there's nobody around that table, and that comes from the EU side as well, who's putting working people's interests first in these negotiations.
Okay, before I move on, I think I should give Carl the chance to respond to this debate if you wish to do so, Carl.
Well, I think a lot of people in the UK voted to leave, and as I think one of the main reasons people voted to leave was purely to end freedom of movement, and I think that has to be respected. There was a referendum on this, and that was one of the key issues, was immigration.
Well, but maybe you'd like to explain to the audience why you think freedom of movement is a bad idea.
Well, not even just from the UK's point of view. Other countries have really negatively been affected by this. Like, one of the examples is Croatia. Croatia's population has actually decreased around 200 to 300,000 since they've joined the European Union, and they're losing their workforce. Their economy's in decline, youth unemployment's increasing, and over here we've seen it's negatively affected things like wages. Wages are stagnating and not growing. How's that rubbish?
That's not true.
That's the fault of the Tory government.
Yes.
Yeah, it's part of the... Can I answer? It's because there's an unlimited amount of people from Eastern Europe that can come and work here. That's not...
The NHS, they make up 25% of the NHS.
I'm not... UKIP don't want to stop immigration.
Who's going to be in the NHS? Who's going to be in the university? Who's going to work
You've made your point, which we've
You can put an immigration system which treats all people the same. It doesn't matter if they're white people from Eastern Europe. Like, I honestly think this is one of the misconstrued points of it. What we believe in is, how is it wrong to have doctors from all parts of the world treated the same in an immigration system than it is to let as many people come in and work here as they please? We need to have an immigration system which is sensible, and the Conservatives have let everyone down on this. They were elected on a manifesto pledge to keep immigration to tens of thousands, which they knew they couldn't do. And they've not... People will say that immigration from outside the European Union has not changed either, and that is true. That needs to be fixed as well. There are major problems around immigration, and that's why there's such a frustration around it in so many places across the UK. And working class communities well, if you visit them, if you speak to them, a lot of people feel that they're suffering from this, and we can talk about whether that's true or not, but people are frustrated right now with the current immigration system and want it to be changed, and that's a major reason why people voted to leave.
Okay, right, well, I think if nothing else, the last 20 minutes has demonstrated immigration is still a hotly contested subject in this country, but I'd like to move us on a little bit. I'm now going to give the new boy on the block a privilege, because there is a particular request from the audience for clarification. So, Peter, what is ChangeUK's position regarding a second Scottish independence referendum?
Okay, we don't support a second independence referendum.
So why are you opposed to a second Scottish independence referendum?
Because we believe that we're stronger together, so we wish to remain together. So we are a unionist party.
But why? But if you've got confidence in the right of the British public to, from your perspective, to make the right decision in the second EU referendum, why don't you have the confidence to believe that the Scottish public would make the right decision in a second independence referendum?
I'm pretty sure that the Scottish people would make it.
So why not? So why not therefore allow the SNP to hold it and demonstrate the case, and then you would probably ensure that the issue really was killed off for a generation.
Well, it probably will be killed off for a generation, but the main issue that we don't support it is because it's very clear from the EU that if Scotland as a country decides to exit the Union of the United Kingdom, it will have to exit, even for a short period, and I'll accept that there will be transitional arrangements for a short period whilst they achieve the mechanisms to enter as a European Union state.
Do you think that if the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, Scotland gets the ability to say, hang on, we want to stay, that the European Union is going to make that difficult for Scotland?
No, of course they're not going to make it difficult. I've worked with the politicians down there in Brussels long enough to know that there'll always be a fudge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, quite. Okay, right. Now let me move on to an important wider issue, which perhaps, is the other issue about the European Union that was important in the debate about Brexit. It continues to be important in the debate about Brexit, which is about the European Union and the economy. So the challenge has been put here is that following the financial crash, a decade of austerity has led to the rise of nationalist movements across Europe. If we remain, how can the EU Parliament remain and reform or rebel to assess the challenge from separatist movements? And so let me kind of just add on to that, insofar as we think that the rise of nationalist stroke populist movements in many, though not all, European Union countries in the last 10 years is at least partly a consequence of the financial crash. How are you going to, what can be done to make people believe that actually the European Union is an economically successful and viable institution? Let me start with John.
Because it is, because the facts show that it is. There was a figure bandied around.
So there wasn't anything called the Eurozone crisis?
No, well, I mean, the Eurozone, you ask a Greek politician what happened in Greece in the lead up to the Eurozone crisis for Greece, and they will tell you to your face, Greece lied for 20 years about Greek budgets. And when those budgets were finally audited, then all the accounts that they had fell through. That is not the fault of the Eurozone per se. It may have been a fault to let Greece into the Eurozone too early, and I think that's probably true of several countries. But you won't see anybody in France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, or the Netherlands saying that the Eurozone is a bad idea and we shouldn't be in it. But it has to be. But
I think if we mentioned Spain, Portugal, Italy, and for a time Ireland, you might get a slightly different answer.
Yes, you would. In the same way that if you asked anybody about the British economy, would you say it's been continuous growth without any hesitation for the last 40 years? No, you wouldn't. So it's the same with Ireland. But the point is, you will not find any majority in any of those countries seeking to leave the Eurozone, because it's a reserve currency probably 3 times bigger than pound sterling at the moment.
Okay, so basically the answer seems to be you don't think the European Union needs to do anything to improve its economic performance.
No, I didn't say. You asked me about the Eurozone specifically. No, there's an awful lot they could do, and I've talked on, for instance, how you use migrant labour and the asylum system better. But there's a whole range of areas. I mean, the climate challenge is a massive one for a small, crowded continent, but it's with a lot of water and a lot of access to other natural resources. There are all sorts of areas you can get into. But the idea that somehow Europe It was always talked about in Europe in 2016 that somehow Europe is failing and the rest of the world is going up. What is happening is global trade generally is increasing. And yes, the rate of growth in Europe is slower because China is going like the clappers, and because countries in Southeast Asia are going like the clappers that weren't doing anything before. But we're all going up with the tide, not going down.
Okay, Alex, how can we improve the European Union economically?
Well,
How can we stop? I mean, I think nationalists, we kind of don't include the SNP in this particular.
yeah, I mean, there's always a different kinds of populism and whatnot. I mean, one of the things I think is very, very key is the UK has been churning out stories about how the EU is going to collapse every single week for years and years and years, and how the Eurozone's a total basket case, etc., etc. And the EU is still here, and in fact, the EU is looking way more stable than the UK is right now. It's actually functioning like a proper organisation, whereas the UK barely functions at all. Now the EU's got a long way to go before it's perfect, but it's only really existed in its current form since the early 90s, so there is a lot of way to go, and we want to be part of that project, part of pushing it towards the right direction it needs to go in. And one of the things that's quite interesting in terms of the idea that the people across Europe are really tired of the EU and want to throw it up. Since Brexit, European polling has actually shown an increase in support for the European Union. Just from seeing what happens when countries like the UK sort of try and bumble out without a plan. So I think that's important to mention there. But clearly there is a way to go, but we want to be part of that as an independent country, ideally, and that's the difference between the EU and the UK. If you don't like the direction the EU is going in, you have the opportunity to leave, which is currently being denied to us by the UK. But
Craig.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do, particularly around tax avoidance and tax evasion. So the crisis that we had in Europe and across the world, started in America, was because big business were greedy. Bankers were greedy. Who suffered? The poorest in society suffered, with years of pay freezes in their salaries, with high unemployment. We see unemployment figures the lowest they've ever been. But you can be classed as working if you work 1 hour a month. We really need to look at how we record employment and unemployment. But what we have to... I'll take that because it's been so little this evening. But going after big companies like Google, Starbucks, Europe does have a responsibility to do that, because these big corporations, their employees are paying more tax than they're paying. And in 2019, that's utterly disgusting when we have people queuing at food banks, including people who work for those corporations.
Okay, Michael, I think maybe I'll ask you, and then if somebody else wants to come in, they can. So, what's the UK going to be able to do outside the European Union to ensure that it's more economically successful than it is at the moment, and that as a result, therefore as a result, the Brexit Party phenomenon proves to be temporary more than permanent?
Well, I think the Brexit Party phenomenon, John, is temporary because we've not left the European Union yet. And I think people are angry that democracy, as they see it in 2016, has not been implemented. I think your question was about the UK economy and what we can do to grow it. I think part of the challenge for young...
Outside the European Union, what can you do that you can't do inside the European Union?
Well, outside of the European Union, certainly we can reduce our tariffs so that from international products which come in, so that we can...
And how many trade deals have we struck so far?
Well, we can't strike a trade deal until we pass the withdrawal agreement. But we're in negotiations with a lot of people, and the UK government is optimistic about putting in place trade deals. But I do think we need an optimistic...
So does that mean we're taking chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef?
I somehow don't think we'll be taking chlorinated chicken and beef.
Well, that's what they've said.
Yep.
But at the moment, the United States is pursuing a case in the WTO against the European Union's position.
Yes.
So what prospect is there of a free trade agreement with the United States unless we accept a much greater liberalisation of food standards than we currently have inside the European Union?
Well, certainly a trade deal will take into consideration a lot of aspects, but the UK will stand strong on ensuring that we're not getting chlorinated chicken into our consumers. So obviously that just seems a bit of a scare story to me. rather than people having positive visions about, what we can do outside of the European Union and looking to strike trade deals with, other countries.
The trade deals involve compromise. They involve, for example, often making agreements about making it easier for people to move between the two countries. So why is it that trade deals that might involve liberalising immigration rules for those countries with whom you do a deal a good idea when having a liberal trade deal with the European Union is apparently such a bad idea?
Well, I don't think people have a problem with immigrants coming to this country. What people have a concern about is people who come here not necessarily for a job, because when European freedom movement was introduced, you had to have a job to move to a country. Then it was changed that you didn't need to have a job and you could bring your whole family over.
But we know that the United Kingdom could, within the framework of the Freedom of Union, introduce tighter rules to avoid that situation than it currently has. It so happens that we have a rather liberal interpretation of the freedom of movement rules. So why doesn't the UK government do something about that?
Well, I think the UK government is tightening it up. It's got its immigration bill before the House of Commons, and I know certainly Scottish Conservative MPs are looking at the £30,000 cap, and especially relaxing rules for agricultural workers, especially in Angus, in the North East, to ensure that we're delivering an immigration system after we leave the European Union, which doesn't at the moment discriminate in favour of people within the European Union, but opens us up to the rest of the world. Because I think it was the Fraser of Allender institution said that by 2050 there'll be no European economy in the top 10 economies, so we need to be far more outward looking.
Okay, sounds like we're going to accept more immigration from China and India and less from Germany and Italy. But anyway, Alex.
I think Liam,
Sorry, can you speak up?
Who's
Alex?
No, perfect. I was just going to say, in terms of immigration, the benefits we get from that, as Liam has said already, we shouldn't be putting extra barriers in the way of people coming here to work, to contribute to our economy, because immigrants, as reports have shown time and time again, are net contributors to our economy. So we should do the exact opposite.
Okay, now this is, I want to move on, Maggie, if I might, ever so much. We've only got 5 minutes left, and I think the last 5 minutes of discussion like this should be confessional. Okay? And we have a questioner that wishes to see whether anybody wishes to confess. We've already quizzed Michael about why we are in the situation we are and whether we can trust the Conservative Party to do anything about it. This question is directed at the opposition parties. And it says as follows: are the Liberal Democrats, Labour and the SNP in any way responsible for the current Westminster mess? Would you like to admit in any way at all, the three of you, that perhaps somewhere along the way, maybe thinking further back as to why perhaps people don't share necessarily your vision of the European Union as being a good thing? Is there anything you'd like to confess that maybe you might have done differently that might mean we were not in the situation that we currently are? Now, John, you're the party of being for the European Union, and why is it that you've been so inadequate at persuading the public of the merits of this institution that you've been arguing in favour of since the late 1950s?
It will come as no surprise to everybody that the 2015 and 2017 elections weren't exactly a walk in the park for the Liberal Democrats. So it's hard to have the same impact with 12 MPs that you had with 76. Had George Osborne been slightly less enthusiastic to decapitate every Lib Dem MP and had a Lib Dem group of 70, 80 in the Parliament, in the last Parliament, we might not be in the situation we're in, because after all we resisted a referendum on Europe for 5 years as part of the coalition deal. So yeah, it's regrettable to me that we wouldn't have more.
But you did allow legislation to be passed that meant that we could no longer transfer any further competences to the European Union without a referendum.
Yeah.
Yeah, which strikes most people as a Eurosceptic piece of legislation.
Well, we're not seeking to move any further competence to the European Union. No one has extended such an offer or an idea from any other member state, including our own. So that's fine in one respect, because I don't see there's a big area of competence that we're lacking at the moment. But what I would say, if we had been more part of the system, had the AV vote gone a bit differently as well, and people showed a bit more enthusiasm for that, we might have had a Westminster system that even remotely represented where the people were voting, instead of having this 48-52 situation. I'd have been prepared to accept Nigel Farage as an MP, although he's failed 7 times, and a lot of other people, even bloody Nick Griffin I've accepted in the Westminster Parliament if he was there on fair votes. But you can't claim that everybody else's fault, that the 2 main parties who hold the whip hand in all of this have failed for 3 years to get us anywhere closer.
All right, Craig, confession time. Doesn't the record of New Labour owe some responsibility from where we are now? Would it not be the case that if New Labour had regulated the banks more effectively, for example, that maybe, like some other countries, the United Kingdom banking system would not have been as exposed to what was going on in the American system that it was, if in fact Tony Blair had actually got this country into the euro, would we not be much more clearly integrated into the European Union? Isn't New Labour partly responsible for where we are?
Well, perhaps
This is confession time, Craig. You're allowed to admit it.
I don't think Tony Blair is going to be annoyed if I say one thing against him. However, this was a referendum, firstly, that I don't think we should ever have had. Do you know, David Cameron wasn't expecting a majority, but he played to his backbenchers. This was a referendum no one thought that the Leave side would win. So, do you know, I think the Labour Party as well, we didn't work hard enough because so many people just assumed that Remain would walk it. The political elite, and I understand my party is sometimes accused of being in that, do you know, we underestimated how angry the public were with politicians. Now, so when we go down the route of, yeah, but people didn't know what they were voting for, I think people were voting to send a real strong message to politicians that they are fed up with them. That's why I think if we're going to have a second referendum, be sure we're going to win. Because at the moment, I'm not certain the Remain is, just because I know 3 people in this audience put their hand up to say that they would vote Leave. Now, if there was a second referendum, I would campaign to Remain. I would vote Remain. However, I did that last time, but I was still on the losing side. So we have to, if all politicians, everyone in this room as well, if you're passionate about something, then you have to go out and you have to make sure you convince another 10 people and they're convincing other people. We shouldn't just be so complacent that we think it's a walk in the park, and I think a second referendum isn't a walk in the park either, because there are a lot of people who are so fed up. Now, I think they may be fed up, but they should realise that being fed up and getting a no deal is worse than being fed up. So actually, we all have a responsibility, politicians and the public. If you genuinely believe in something, then you should be fighting every day for it.
Okay, well that takes me to Alex for the final confession.
Yep, I'm just writing it right now.
Yeah, good. Isn't it true at the end of the case that despite, well, put it slightly differently, the SNP has been in favour of independence in Europe since around 1990. So why was it the case that around 1 in 3 of those people who voted SNP in 2015 actually voted to leave in Scotland? And hasn't the SNP also proved relatively ineffective at persuading many people in Scotland, including within its own movement, of the merits of the European Union?
I will answer that just very quickly. I'm going to address 2 points from the last question. I think there's a reason Labour didn't campaign very much during the European referendum, and it's because their leader is a Eurosceptic.
Yeah, but Labour was no less unsuccessful than you were at getting people to vote in favour of Remain. So 1 in 3 Labour voters voted to leave, and 1 in 3 SNP voters voted to leave.
Every single local authority area in Scotland voted to Remain, so I would class that as a success.
But
to be honest,
more Scots voted for Brexit than the SNP in 2017.
Every single local authority area, as I said, voted to Remain. And I do appreciate your point about people being tired of this whole fiasco, because it's been a total fiasco from start to finish, partially because of your party, partially because of the Tories, but there's an easy way to fix it, and it's to revoke Article 50 and keep us in the European Union.
Okay, all right. as you can see, getting confessions out of politicians is more difficult, but they are in the middle of an election campaign, so perhaps it was rather unreasonable to expect them to in the first place. Maybe we should bring them back next week and then we might get more answers. Who knows? Anyway, I think we should say thank you to all of our representatives. They have debated with each other with a degree of good humour. They've put up with my interventions. And thank you for your questions, many of which were extremely penetrating. I'm sure they could have found much more interesting things to do on a Saturday evening. So we're very grateful to you for giving up your time, for explaining your position of your list and sometimes yourselves. So I think, can we give them all, please, a very large round of applause. And the only final thing I want to say is to thank this man here, who's responsible for organising this evening. We're sometimes told that, you know, face-to-face public meetings are dead. Well, you've grown to prove that they are not dead, and that they're well worth.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming. That concludes our event for this evening. Thanks again to the speakers and all the best with the coming campaign. Thank you, John. Thank you to Linda and the team from Broadcasting Scotland for putting that online. I can also just give a round of applause, please, to our volunteers who've been helping. If anybody wants to join that, there was a plan to hold the Eurovision final in here, but due to policy around DDS, the boycott, divestment sanctions, that isn't going ahead. But we are doing an event elsewhere. If anybody wants to go to that, I know some people still want to go to watch some sort of event. So, Annika, could you stand up for a second? If you go over and speak to Annika, one of our volunteers, she'll tell you the details of that party. So thank you for your time, and all the best with the elections on the 21st. Thank you.
Well done, Nicely done. Yeah.
Good thing you been anyway, the campaign.
Yeah, no, we
Thank you.
physical contact with.
Yeah, I know, those green screens are quite remarkable.
We had Maggie Chapman in there. I said, look, we got you. All right, you ready? Okay. John Curtice, I don't know if anybody's been watching our wonderful broadcast of this evening. I'm sure they have, though. And you were the master of ceremonies, and how do you think it went?
Well, I think it went very well in the sense that the first thing above all you want to do is to ensure that you have a civilised debate in which people can be made aware of the differences of position. I thought particularly at the beginning, although we had quite a lot of candidates who supposedly were all in favour of European Union membership, we discovered that their vision of that membership was A, often rather different, and B, had its limits. That indeed, I don't think there was anybody, in fact, who was very clear that we should necessarily be signing up to the euro, and there was some debate about signing up to Schengen. So we got at some of the subtleties that perhaps has not been obvious in the debate about what our future relationship should be, should we ever decide to change our minds about Brexit. But the second thing was that indeed, we did actually have quite a good debate. We particularly had a good debate about immigration, where the different views about, well, how far the United Kingdom does or does not need to control immigration and whether or not it should or should not give privilege migration from the EU as elsewhere. What are the implications for younger people of perhaps the UK not being any longer in part of the Erasmus scheme? That came out. It got quite heated at stages, but that was fine. But above all, the candidates maintained their good humour, and so therefore I think we got quite a lot of light and not too much heat, and hopefully people who've been watching this or who've attended in the evening have perhaps got a slightly better understanding of where the parties understand, and maybe occasionally one or two places where perhaps they've still got to think things through somewhat.
So do you think it was a more or less fair representation of where the country, Scotland, stands at the current time?
Well, I mean, there is no doubt that the balance of opinion on that panel was basically in favour of Remain. It was, I think, unfortunate that we didn't have a representative from the Brexit Party. That would have helped to add a greater degree of balance. But to that extent, we did between us, I think, debate not so much the merits of the original Brexit decision, but rather, what we should do now that we find where we are. And I think certainly, that as a result, therefore, meant we also had a debate about some of the decisions that not just the UK government, but also the SNP and the opposition Labour Party have made in the course of the last 2.5 years, and whether or not there are things that perhaps they could have done differently, or whether there are things that need to be clearer about what they are proposing to do. This wasn't just simply a debate about the limitations, as many see it, of the UK government.
And there was a fascinating comment you made at the end where you suggested that it's a Saturday night, but we had a very good turnout and very young people, to my mind.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Well, hopefully we do get young people in a university institution like this, and hopefully the fact that, of course, a rather less controversial, well, that's always less controversial, a different cultural institution and manifestation of Europeanness, which now apparently stretches all the way to Australia. That is the Eurovision Song Contest goes tonight. There was a certain suitability about the fact that we're having this debate at the time when another European-wide institution, which at least makes us think about the rest of Europe for a few hours once a year, is also going on.
We also had some competition above. I don't know if you know that there was a pole dancing thing going on above us. But anyway, John, thank you.
It is a student union, so we must expect these kind of extraneous noises. There we go.
And thank you very much for talking to Broadcasting Scotland. It's very, very kind of you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. So, hello. Who are you, sir?
My name is Sherrard. I volunteer in a number of roles that represent young people in Scotland and the UK to the European Union, to the Council of Europe, and to other pan-European organisations.
Does that mean you get to travel and see all these lovely places?
It was also a wee bit of travelling, but a lot of that's spent in meeting rooms, so I don't really get to see much of the countries or the cities, sadly. But I'm passionate about Europe and about getting to see that eventually, so yeah.
And talking about going to see it, do you understand that there are rail tickets in the summer for 18-year-old people to just get for free from the European Union so they can travel all over the European Union during their holidays?
I'm well aware that's the Discover EU programme. I've got a pass myself, it just arrived in the post, and I look forward to doing that between July and August this year. So I think that's a really good initiative, and it's hopefully one that we would remain a part of, perhaps through the Shared Prosperity Fund that the government's currently organising in the future, but we'd have to see. It's all up in the air.
Yeah. But they have actually extended it to the UK for next year anyway, so that's all right because I've read it. But, you know, the European Union is far more than just an economic club, as you've just outlined. How do you see it from the perspective that you're a much younger man than I, and your future in the world once my generation has decided to leave it?
So there's things like the EU Youth Goals, which last year were a big consultation, the largest consultation of young people in Europe, and their number one concern was connecting the EU with youth. I think there's a massive issue with all democratic institutions relating to young people, working with young people in the future, and I think that goes for Europe as well. I think young people are more passionate about the European Union and the European project than older generations are. That's reflected in statistics, reflected in the referendums, and I think especially in Scotland it is. Whether or not that means that we should remain, I think young people's voices are important, but they're no more important than our older voters and other people in society as well. That's a different argument. But it's very well argued that young people are more passionate about Europe than almost anyone else in society. So.
And does that cut across the different social classes that the UK has so, I don't know, carefully nurtured and maintained over all these centuries? Because you're a university man, so what about the guy who didn't do that and went on an apprenticeship and did something else?
I think that's a very important point, and class, particularly working class people, are an important part of the Brexit debate. But I really think it's about telling voters, telling people about the issues they are passionate about, stagnant wages, unemployment in their areas. That's not because of the European Union, that's because of the government in Westminster, decisions we ourselves have made. It's not about immigrants or anything else. Immigrants actually contribute to the UK economy. It's a net profit we make from immigration. It's really about deciding that it's us as a country. We have caused these problems, it's our MPs, and it's the people we vote for that have caused austerity, that have caused stagnant wages, and caused uncertain employment rights currently.
It won't keep you much longer, Hugh, but the other thing that I'd like to just quiz you a little bit more on is that apprenticeship thing, because my own children were brought up in Switzerland, although they are Scottish born, and we went there, and they've all been through the Swiss apprenticeship system, and I will tell you that is the basis of the Swiss economy, training people to be first class at what they do. Now, how about apprenticeships and things for young people here in Scotland, and how is that affected by the European Union, do you think?
I think apprenticeships are an important part. The UK sadly is overall a service-based economy, but I think if you look at things like the European Union taking the lead of any pan-continental organisation in tackling things like unpaid internships, which are very similar to internships for the service industry, they are saying that we should pay or remunerate interns. It's a very important aspect, and we shouldn't allow people to sell their labour for nothing, basically. I also think that it's an important part that the key industry young people in the UK go into is hospitality, and that's something that the EU has regulations over, but in the UK we really unregulate hospitality. People work for less than the minimum wage. I personally have worked for more than 14 hours without a break. It's a massive issue, and rather than actually tackling it in Westminster, in Holyrood, we instead go through the school education system, not learning about trade unions unless it's through history, not being taught a minimum wage or employment rights in PSE. Instead we go for the same drugs are bad lesson over and over again. That's important. I really think that it is important that we do create a good job market for young people, a good atmosphere and employment for young people, in much the way that Switzerland has done with apprenticeships.
Thank you very much, Hugh.
Well,
very kind of you to talk.
Thank you very much.
See you again, I hope.
Of course.
And who are you, sir?
My name is Michael Rennie and I'm a first year politics student at the University of Glasgow.
And you got really very involved in that debate. I was actually standing at the back, couldn't quite gather it all, so maybe one or two people who were watching it didn't get it either. But what was the comment you made?
So the comment I made was that the fault for low wages in this country is not because of immigration. The reason that we have low wages in Britain is because of the Tory government's inaction over the national living wage. It's also because big multinational companies just aren't paying their employees a fair wage. It's nothing to do with migrants. And with migrants, we've actually seen a benefit to our economy. They work 25% of NHS staff are foreign born. That's 25% of doctors, nurses. Our universities, particularly here in Scotland, are massively European. We have lots of European academics. They bring so much to our society, and the ideas of UKIP and the far right need to be challenged. At this election, we can send a clear message that we reject this anti-EU immigrant rhetoric, which sadly has come dangerously close to the mainstream because of Labour and the Conservatives.
It's wonderful to see so many. I mean, I look at it from the perspective of being in my mid-60s, but seeing people of 20 and I don't know how old here today. How did you feel about the number of people who turned out on a Saturday night?
It's an excellent turnout, particularly young people. I think it shows that there is lots of engagement, there is lots of thinking in this election. I think turnout may be higher than last time. People are feeling really energised and people want to come down and hear what our politicians have to say. I think the arguments here tonight, there's been obviously a very varied panel, but there have been some clear arguments tonight and some clear visions for the future. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution.
No problem.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, who are you, sir?
My name is Alex Kerr. I'm 24 years old and I'm one of the SNP's 6 candidates for European elections in 2019.
So that means if the SNP are the most voted for group within the election that's coming up next Thursday, you might get to be one of the members of Parliament.
Well, it's a proportional representation system, so each time you get a seat, your vote share is halved, and it's fairer because it means minority voices get heard too. But what it does mean is I need about 85% of the vote to get elected. So what I would say is, on the 23rd of May, if you really want me to get there, get everybody you know to the polling stations to vote SNP.
Well, it would be great to have someone of 24 there. Was it Bernadette Devlin got elected to the Westminster Parliament from Ireland? Gosh, how many years ago was that? I think she was 21. Yeah. So it wouldn't be bad. I mean, I don't know what the youngest member of Parliament of the European Parliament is, but anyway. So just tell me why you think that we should be in the European Union. Just a short but succinct.
Yeah, I mean, the European Union provides so much, especially to small independent countries like Scotland, like we hope Scotland's going to be. It provides so much in terms of tackling larger problems like climate change, and it also brings folk together. I mean, it was originally brought together to peace in Europe, and so far has been incredibly successful. In terms of for young folk like myself, students and things, the freedom of movement, the right to live, work and study in countries across the European Union is something that is beyond valuable, and we're set to lose by being dragged out from the shambolic Brexit process.
And there were two folks on the panel, the Conservatives and the UKIP, who would prefer us to be out of the European Union.
Yep.
And their arguments were to do with immigration and people coming here. But what about the other story? I mean, because we as Scottish people, we're allowed to go and work in if you count England, 28 other places.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. I touched on it when I was up there, but the point I would make, perhaps more importantly, is it's not just UKIP and it's not just Brexit. The Tory party also want to end freedom movement, and as you heard tonight, the Labour Party are going to bring the axe down on that as well. fundamentally, every single report, and it's almost without fail, every single report shows that immigration is a net positive in Scotland. We as a country have an ageing population, and we need it for economic reasons as well as social and cultural, which are positive. We need it for economic reasons. There are things that Scotland needs to be independent for to make our own decisions that suit us, and that is the key fundamental point of this. For the perfect example is a post-study work visa. We get folk in from China, all kinds of places, training in engineering, training in accountancy, and then what happens with them? They can't apply for a post-study work visa because the UK scrapped it. Instead, we send them away. We train them up, and we don't keep them here, even if they want to live and work in Scotland and contribute.
And of course, it's more and more a global world, isn't it? Because I bet you've got a phone. Yeah, I can see it's in the outline of your trousers, and you can actually pick up the whole world upon that.
Well, exactly, yep. And it's just the ability for folk to move wherever they like in the European Union, it just opens up so many possibilities, especially for young folk, and the fact that people can go abroad, they can get married abroad, they can move their family around is just so positive.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, that affected me before Switzerland joined. And my wife-to-be was stopped at Aberdeen Airport and they wouldn't let her in. It was quite an horrific idea, I can tell you, but that's a personal thing. Maybe I shouldn't go into it. But thank you very much for your time and for talking to us, and look forward to seeing you on many, many hustings, and I hope you get there, and I hope that you have a great life in politics.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie at Chapman of the Greens, and we've spoken before, so we've had good conversation. And tell me what you thought of tonight's debate.
I thought it was a really interesting evening. Great to see so many young people coming out, because we know that it's often young people's voices that are ignored or not listened to or not heard in political discussion and political debate. So really great to see the organisation bringing young people in to this discussion this evening, and talking about things that are going to affect young people's lives. So some of the things that I talked about in the discussion were our policy for freedom of movement, not only within Europe, but we want to open that up wider. We want to end Fortress Europe and say that actually we want an open border system for Scotland, because we know that immigrants contribute not only to our economy, but vital contributions they make to our communities, to our society, to our culture, and that should be welcomed. And of course, the Scottish Greens' big priority on tackling climate breakdown, that is for the next generation, that is for the future of our planet. Without urgent action, there isn't going to be a planet for our young people to live on. So really, really glad to be here.
When there were two younger folk who were speaking, and I've got to say that I didn't think they really had a grasp of the idea of Europe. Mm-hmm. They were really rather anti-Europe. In fact, well, you know exactly who I mean, it was the Conservatives and the UKIP. Now, can you give us a little bit more from the perspective that they didn't seem to understand that it's more than just a European club of money? I mean, I was hoping that we might be able to speak to one or two of them, but they don't seem to be here, so they've got no chance to defend themselves for what I've just said. Mm-hmm. But you know, it is not just an economic club, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't seem to still grab.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the founding principles of the European Union was to build peace, and we didn't talk about that much this evening. But that's fundamental to the European project, and to a lot of the work that the European Union and the other institutions of Europe do around the world, around building peace, ensuring that we actually have sustainable relationships, whether that's in terms of trade or international development, with countries from every continent to build understanding, to build peace. And one thing that we touched on earlier this evening was the refugee crisis that we've seen because of the bombing of Syria by the UK government, by the United States, and quite frankly, the European Union, I don't think, has been strong enough in its approach to that. We need a very, very clear shared responsibility. So all European Union countries share a responsibility to look after, to protect, and to treat with dignity people who are fleeing war-torn areas, wherever in the world those areas are. And there's a real opportunity for us to say in these elections, yes, the European Union as it is not perfect. That is why, as Greens, we are saying we want to remain, but we want to rebel. And we want to make it more democratic. We want to open it up, make it less controlled by that economic club that you've talked about. And so we don't get the treatment that we saw of Greece by the Troika, which incidentally which includes the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which isn't even a European institution. So it's about making the democratic institutions of the European Union stronger, so we can counter some of that very, very poor, very bullying behaviour that we saw of Greece.
See, the thing that I noticed too is that nobody offers an alternative. They say, "Oh, we go WTO," but I assure you they don't know what they're talking about when they say that, because nobody knows that yet. I've investigated a bit, and they'll be really surprised what comes down the road for them then. But if nobody stands up and says, look, we're going to go this way, really no point in going anywhere, is there?
Well, no, I mean, I've been quite appalled by the level of debate actually since before the referendum in 2016, there wasn't a positive case put for any kind of alternative, as you say, never mind the details of what that alternative might look like. And the idea of WTO rules actually is quite scary, because we know that means a deregulation of workers' rights. We know that won't be good for environmental regulations. We know that won't be good for communities across Scotland. And so it's really, really important that we say remaining a member of the European Union is vital at this time, but we need to reform it too. We need to make it more democratic and make sure that it works for the people, not profit, and for communities and not corporations.
I just finished with this. I don't know if you've been able to keep up with all the news this last week, because you've been hurtling about the countryside doing what you're doing. But I wonder if you caught up with Mr. Liam Fox and the number of trade deals he's actually managed to roll over. And that's just roll over with things that we're already doing with the European Union. Have you got any guess?
Is it 7?
He's actually got up to 10, but that's not so bad. It's, you could probably... Yeah, anyway, I mustn't get into that too much. Thank you very much, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you for your time.
And good luck to see you again soon.
I'm sure we will. Thank you very much.
So thank you for coming to our debate here in Glasgow this evening. Hope you found it informative. I think it certainly was a very good debate, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Broadcasting Scotland as soon as we can. Oh, come to the Full Scottish tomorrow, because that's probably where you're going to see it. Bye-bye.